Welcome to this week's edition of the Freedom and Prosperity Radio Show, a presentation each week across the Commonwealth of Virginia by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas. Thank you for letting us be of service to you this week. You can find out more about us at tertiumquids.org. Find podcasts of previous shows, find out about the Tuesday morning group coalition meetings that meet once a month, and get some great folks live in person with you as well. Membership has its benefits, for certainly. Vincent Vernuccio, Senior Fellow with the Mackinac Foundation, and is joining us to break down this Supreme Court case that's being ruminated over under the robes, Janus and AFSCME. Vinny, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing really well. Hey, Joe, thanks for having me on.
Not at all. Now, this is one of those cases where, again, it seems like this should be an obvious constitutional slam dunk for everyone in the United States to say yes, and our rights and democracy is defended by. Why is this a controversial issue? Give some folks some background, but also get into why this is divisive when it comes down to the political side of it.
Sure. Well, let's talk about exactly what the case Janus versus AFSCME may do, and what the plaintiff, Mark Janus, who is a child support specialist, a public employee out of the state of Illinois, is asking for. Now, what Mark Janus is asking for is he's saying that he's stuck under a union contract and he has to be represented by a union. But he's saying that everything that union does, because it's a government union, is political. So think about it. You have a government union that are negotiating for higher pay or benefits. Where does that money come from? That comes from your tax dollars and mine. They're talking about unions negotiating for working hours. What is that? That's public policy. So what Mark is saying, and his attorneys from the Liberty Justice Center, the National Right to Work Legal Foundation, are saying is that everything that these government unions do is political, and that Mark shouldn't have to pay the union because essentially what the union is doing is it's forcing Mark to pay for political speech, and that's a violation of his First Amendment right, that he should have the right to say, no, I don't want to pay for something I don't believe in. And let me tell you exactly what will happen if the Supreme Court sides with Mark Janus. Essentially, every state in the union for public employees would be a right-to-work state. So the union couldn't force Mark to pay, or public employees like him across the country, and they would have the ability to say no thanks to an unwanted political agenda by the unions. Well, so essentially, the 22 states where a union can get a worker fired for not paying them, that would be illegal for public employees.
Is this also the fruit of something that even Franklin Delano Roosevelt warned us about, which is the proliferation of public sector unions? He warned in the 30s that of all the benefits of unions, certainly that with the government, because the government can't go out of business, because the government is a political body, these were all going to be dangerous fruits that the union movement couldn't start to enjoy. And then we mission creeped away from the scion of the progressive movement said, don't let public unions proliferate, and here we go.
Oh, Joe, how times have changed. You're exactly right. FDR was against government unions. He said that you couldn't collectively bargain with the government, that adversarial nature it can't transpose itself, to use his word, into the public sector. And essentially, he saw the problems of having this type of interest group being able to force people to pay and then negotiating for your tax dollars and mine and using those tax dollars then to get friendly politicians elected and starting a vicious cycle that grows government. And I think FDR would actually want to grow the government from all the programs he did, but still he saw that it would grow in ways that would not serve the public. So yes, FDR was against government unions, and how far his party has come from that sentiment to where they are today.
Well, it also pits the government versus the citizens, where I remember growing up in the 70s in New York, and what good times those were when the sanitation workers would strike in the middle of the summer for an exorbitant pay increase or benefit increase or hours reductions, because all they had to do was say, we're not going to work, because there is no competitive balance. If the United Auto Workers strike Ford, well, I can buy a Chevy. So there's that option. You don't have an option if the sanitation department goes on strike.
Exactly, and that is one of the main problems that you can't New York's government couldn't simply say, okay, you know what, we're going down to Texas. Now, you're seeing a lot of its citizens doing that these days because of the result of this collective bargaining that, you're right, puts the union officials first, the taxpayers second.
So the case, Janus versus AFSCME, you mentioned that this would essentially make all public unions have to compete in the same way any union in Virginia has to compete with right-to-work status. You don't have to. But what about some of the other cases where we've seen, forced membership, no secret ballot, those sorts of things? Does it address some of the things that unions use beyond just the protection of straight-up law to protect their places? Because as I've seen over the last 15 years, the only growing union membership are public sector unions, SEIU and AFSCME.
Well, all that the case does is simply say that public employees across the country, that's including in the 22 non-right-to-work states where unions can get them fired for not paying, have the right to work. So they have a First Amendment right not to pay the union. That's all it does. It would only give them the ability to say, no, I am not going to support your political agenda. You can't force me to pay you. And that's it. And it does not address any other issue. And all right to work does, once again, is say that a union can't get a worker fired for not paying them. It doesn't affect collective bargaining in any other way. Doesn't change that secret ballot issue that you were talking about. Doesn't address things like dues checkoff, where the government is the bills collector for union dues. So all Janus versus AFSCME would do is say that Mark Janus has a First Amendment right not to support the union and the union's political agenda, and that's it.
So and again, it seems like it starts a series of unfortunate events for union leadership, whether it's SEIU or AFSCME or these unions that deal in public sector, especially AFSCME, one of the oldest, where now if I have this ability to not be a member of a union and I decide not to be, and by law I'm protected, my First Amendment right to not associate with this union can't have me fired. Talk about the workplace that creates, the government workplace, Vinny, that now our DMV or our Public Works Department may have some union members and some non-union members. How does that wind up working out in the long run?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what I've experienced firsthand, and I've seen the unions overplay their hand. So when Michigan went fully right to work, you had a lot of unions pushing back. There's first the good, and I do want to give credit where credit's due. You had a lot of unions saying, well, okay, you know what we're going to have to do now? We're going to have to better explain why membership is our value. We're going to have to communicate with our members more, and we're going to have to serve them better. And that's why, it differs by year, but in some years you see right-to-work states actually adding more union members than non-right-to-work states. Why? Because, first, in right-to-work states, there's more jobs and there's more job growth. So when you have more jobs, you have more opportunity for union jobs. But also, it's making those unions stronger because they have to represent their members. They can't take those forced dues for granted anymore. So that's the good. And that's usually what we see in the long term. The short term, however, you have some nearsighted unions that go back to their more adversarial nature. And I've seen unions where if people opt out, they do things like shame lists. So they'll publish people's names in the union magazine. And if it's in some government unions, they'll actually use a bulletin board to paste people's names on a bulletin board for all to see to try to shame them into paying. They derogatively call them free riders or freeloaders, saying they're getting something for nothing, ignoring the fact that the union wants to represent everyone that has that monopoly, even in a right-to-work state. So that's some of the negative things that I've seen in the short term. And you know what that usually results in? More people saying, well, you know what? I don't want to be associated with that kind of organization that's using those bullying tactics. So then even more people come out.
Yeah, because we've just spent the last generation teaching our kids that bullies are bad, and all of a sudden you get to the workplace and you're like, whoa, I just got out of high school that said this was the wrong way to behave. You mentioned, right-to-work states, and it's amazing to me. 10 years ago when we started this program, I think you could count on one hand the number of right-to-work states, and now the majority of states in the United States are right-to-work states, including states like Michigan. I remember Scott Walker's fight with the teachers' unions in Wisconsin, successfully beating them. On an abstract, Vinny, talk about the perhaps long overdue decline of the union movement, and certainly it was born out of some real concerns for welfare and benefit to those working for an organization. But have we grown past where that's an important part of our lives, and are the individuals more likely to be able to look out for themselves in ways that they never were before? Case in point, some of the right-to-work Tennessee car factories where the United Auto Workers would show up there and say, you should unionize. And they're like, yeah, but we make more than you guys do back in your union shop, so why should we do that? Has the competitive marketplace then, rendered unions as a concept obsolete?
Well, this is a little different than what's being argued in the Janus case.
Right.
Janus, once again, all they're doing, First Amendment right, essentially giving right to work, and that's public employees only. So that's the case. Let's get off that topic. And, yeah, exactly what you're talking about. Essentially, unions are stuck in this 20th century industrial revolution, one-size-fits-all collective bargaining model that was great in the 1930s. And, and to quote a Michigan radio host, if the 1930s ever comes back, the unions are ready and they're going to do great. But here's the problem. 30s aren't coming back. And they have this, one size fits all. The only way you can get ahead is by logging another year on the job. Collective bargaining agreements apply to everyone. There's no flexibility there. No matter how hard you work, you can't get ahead because they don't have merit pay. It's only by seniority. So just log in one more year on the job. And a lot of millennials, a lot of young people, they just don't want that. They want the flexibility. They want to be able to say, well, if I work harder, I want to be paid more. I don't want to just have to sit and wait for my seniority to increase. So the business model of unions is failing. It is not adapting to today's flexible workforce. And people are just saying, well, you know what? I can do better on my own. So if unions really want to expand their membership, and I'm focusing more on private sector unions now, they have to adapt their business model. They have to be more like professional service organizations that are giving up the adversarial one-size-fits-all nature of the past and actually serving their members and, frankly, even serving employers and showing value.
Vincent Vernuccio is up from the Mackinac Center on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio. I am, for full disclosure, the son-in-law of a union founder, worked in a machine shop, part of a company that's now known as Air Products, worked very hard regarding benefits, regarding health care, regarding and often would find himself at odds with his rank and file because they wanted the cash in hand. They wanted bigger salaries. They would see other unions getting big dollar figures per hour, but where his contracts were all laden towards, pension funds, they managed their own pension fund. They didn't leave it in the companies to allow for the 80s corporate raiders and those kind of things. And To me, that's what a union should be doing, and we see some of this in our legislation regarding health care. We have our medical care associations and things like that. Is that what unions should be? Where it's just, hey, we're all pitching together. We can get a health care plan that is affordable because we've got 16 stores across the mid-Atlantic, and we can pool that resource to get a good health care plan or a good 401k benefit, that kind of thing, Vinny?
Yeah, I mean, that's where unions can start to adapt. Exactly. I did a study for the Mackinac Center. It's called 21st Century Unionism, and it lays out several different scenarios where unions can actually start adapting their business model, getting away from that one-size-fits-all collective bargaining agreement, and actually providing services for their members. And yeah, insurance was one of them. If they want to basically say they're like private insurance, that would be fantastic as long as it's voluntary. And once again, all of this comes back to unions being voluntary associations, not forcing members to join or to pay or to accept that representation, not forcing employers to have to negotiate with them, but becoming organizations that provide such value that members want to join. They want to be under the union umbrella. They want, like the example you gave, that union insurance. And then employers look at that and say, well, we want top talent, so we voluntarily want to have this union come in. And frankly, the unions are not there yet. There are some that are starting to adapt. And you look at what Uber is doing both in New York City and out on the West Coast to attract drivers and working in voluntary exchanges with some of these unions. That could be the model of the future. But unions need to adapt, and they have to get rid of their adversarial, compelled, one-size-fits-all business model of the early 20th century and the Industrial Revolution and adapt to today's economy.
Well, Vinny, we watched communism, Soviet communism, which was the other fork in the road back at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The United States went union, Europe went socialist, communist, and we've watched them both kind of overlive their lives. Communism, because it was a government structure, collapse. This Janus case certainly seems like this is a similar collapse in there. What do you, as an observer of this, what do you think now with the new Supreme Court justice, is going to be the result of the Janus versus AFSCME case? What do you think the ruling is going to come down?
Well, a lot of legal experts and, frankly, most unions are predicting a win for Mark Janus. I was actually in the court, and Janus versus AFSCME, it's actually a part 2. There was another case, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association,
and I met her.
That argued the exact same thing. Now, unfortunately, what happened was after the case was argued, but before the opinion came down, Justice Scalia died.
I know.
So what happened was the court split 4-4, and essentially it was like a hung jury. It was a hung case, and it really didn't set any precedent. But fact pattern was exactly the same. So essentially we've got 8 out of the 9 justices pretty much already on record of how they're going to come down. And I tell you, the questioning in the court really went in line with how they voted already. You had the liberal justices going against Mark's attorneys, and then you had the Republican-appointed, more conservative justices going against the union attorneys. The one outlier there, of course, is Justice Gorsuch, who recently was appointed to the court, and I tell you, he stayed silent the entire time.
Did he really?
He kept the poker face. Most observers think that he is going to side with the First Amendment and freedom of speech and rule for Mark Janus, but at least during oral arguments, he had a poker face the entire time and did not ask a single question.
Well, I know Rebecca Friedrichs is in the gallery cheering. I met her just a couple of weeks ago, and what an awesome lady she is as well. And I don't know Mark Janus, personally, but in my experience with Rebecca Friedrichs, here is somebody who all she wants to do is teach, and she just didn't want to get involved in all. She just wants to get back into classrooms and teach kids, and that's the sad sidebar to this, is you got unions that get in the way of somebody who just, we should be promoting more people who want to go into a classroom full of disinterested school kids and teach them, and these are the kind of things we should be promoting, not dragging people into court, trying to force them into some orthodoxy one way or another.
No, that's exactly right, and that's what this comes down to. It's it doesn't matter your politics. You shouldn't be forced to pay for something you don't believe in, and you shouldn't have this type of adversarial relationship. Going back to the quote by FDR that you brought up at the start of the interview, that doesn't have a place in public service, and that's why Mark Janus is fighting for his First Amendment right to say, hey, if I support the union, sure, I'll pay them. But if I don't support the union, no one should force me to pay for their political agenda and essentially force me to speak something I do not believe.
Absolutely. Well, keep us up to date. Do you have a timeline as to how soon we might see a ruling on this? Summer, early summer? When do you think, Vincent?
Once again, it's up in the air. Most observers think that it's going to be that because this is such a big decision, it could come at the end of session, so that would be in June.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll have you back on long before then to catch us up on where things stand with this. But thank you for everything you do at the Mackinac Center. And it's MACKINAC.org. Follow them there. And we really appreciate everything that you've brought to the table this week. And we'll talk to you again very soon.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, our radio news magazine we send out across the Commonwealth of Virginia and nationwide at our website, tertiumquids.org, where our next guest has just received the Libertarian Party nomination to run against Tim Kaine for the U.S. Senate. His name is Matt Waters. Matt, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you, sir?
I'm well, Joe. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I know it was a hard-fought campaign amongst dozens of, but I'm certainly glad that you stepped up. And
right.
Tell us a little bit about what has gone on over the last 6 years of Tim Kaine's administration of our Senate seat that has made you want to step up and campaign against him for that Senate seat.
Yeah, so I would say it's more of the same, Joe. I mean, I think he has a lot of explaining to do, right? I mean, you serve in office, and you have an obligation to tell folks what you've done, and I think that there's a lot of dodging and weaving when it comes to incumbents, because not a whole lot's being done. In fact, I think things are becoming undone, which is why I've thrown my hat in the ring, and I think the priorities are backwards, and I think we need to reprioritize what our major focus should be.
Well, let's start with that. Let's start with what Matt Waters' priorities would be to represent us as a senator going forward. And I guess I should let folks be able to go through your website. Where can people find you online or through Facebook, Matt?
Sure. So mattwaters.com is the web address, and you can find me on Facebook. I believe it's at Virginia VA Senate 2018, but if you go on Facebook, it will pop up. There's a Facebook page as well.
mattwaters.com. And so let's go into your priorities, because Tim Kaine has been a puzzlement for many. It seemed like, as somebody asked me when he was announced as vice presidential candidate, did Hillary just go through and look for somebody who had done the least in the Senate and pick them? So I guess amongst those who haven't done a whole lot, what would Matt Waters, the senator, be doing for us once he gets there?
Yeah, so my priority is the American people first, and then secondly, the role of government. You know, we've gotten these things backwards. Again, I'm going to be hopefully reversing things, putting the car in reverse, and let's go back to, the compact with America, 1776, 1789. I said, what is the role of government? Well, the role of government is to protect the people's rights. Anything beyond that, the government should not be doing. Well, I mean, you can go down the list and see that the government is doing far more than protecting our rights. They are, doing education. I mean, take a country like Canada does not have a Department of Education at that level, but we do.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Great Britain. Great Britain has privatized the airports and the post office. Not so in America. And if you've got socialist countries like this that can understand the value of the marketplace and value of entrepreneurship and privatization, then what's happening in America? What's going on in Washington? And it's the government knows best. And so what happens when the government knows best, if that's the philosophy, then our liberties are limited. They're stifled. And so I want to empower individuals again to take back their rightful life, liberty, and property, and pursuit of happiness, that is. So look, my number one goal is this. Take away the personal federal income tax. Give Americans, every single worker in this country, if you look at the median mean, it's about $11,500 to $12,500 pay raise. And that would mean substantial cuts to the federal treasury.
Oh, yeah. Well, where would you start with those kind of cuts? We look at some of the staggering numbers of the entitlement programs and the things that the government has already promised people that they were going to get paid were they to go along with their schemes. Are we just at a Bernie Madoff moment where we have to turn around and say, sorry, we're going to prison, not going to pay you off? Or are we going to have to figure that one out on the other side as well, Matt?
Joe, there are a number of places you can cut. I mean, look, as a libertarian, one of the things that distinguishes us from our conservative, quote-unquote, Republican friends is we do still believe in things like a balanced budget. The Republican Party no longer does that. Trump is pushing a John Kerry, Mike Dukakis gas tax. You've got spending that's increasing on both sides. I call them the Republicrats. The Libertarian Party, let me just say this, is not a third party. Honestly, we're the second party because the Republicans and the Democrats are the same thing. And if you think you're getting something different, you're fooling yourself. You're kidding yourself. You're getting this exact same thing. The Republicans were against the debt ceiling with Obama. They were for a balanced budget with Obama. And as soon as Trump comes in, that goes out the window. Ted Cruz votes for the budget. Quote-unquote conservatives Mike Lee vote for the budget. This is outrageous, and someone needs to stand athwart the hill that is Washington and say, "Stop! Enough! We've got to stop this." So, but there's plenty of places to cut. I mean, you can. I mean, look, as a libertarian, let me start with the Department of Defense. One of my single platforms is to bring the United States troops home from around the globe. We cannot continue to police the world. Trump is now increasing the budget from $600 billion to I think over $700 billion. In military spending. And by the way, to understand that properly, you have to understand that China, Russia, the UK, Germany, Japan, and Saudi Arabia combined don't spend that much money in their Defense Department. So why are we doing this? I mean, we could cut $200 billion from the Defense Department, close bases overseas, bring the troops home. And that's just for starters. You can look at entitlement spending. There's various ways to push back on means testing, to retirement age, to moving to privatization. It's going to take time to get there, but there are actuaries that show it can be done. And by the way, if we don't do it, you're right. When I'm at the ripe old age of 65 or 75, there's no money because Social Security goes bankrupt in 2035, Medicare goes bankrupt in 2029, and Medicaid goes bankrupt in 2028. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to do something.
Well, what would you think about, and when you had mentioned eliminating the income tax, which I think many people just went yes and pumped their fist over, is the idea of at least a flat consumption tax or something along those lines. It didn't seem like that was your first thought. Your first thought was, we're going to get rid of the income tax and cut the difference out of the budget. Would you do a flat rate in national sales tax or something like that, or not at all?
Yeah, so look, we know that the money coming into the Treasury from individuals on the personal income tax is around $1.5 trillion. So that's quote unquote how we have to pay for it. So let me back up. We did not, and so people think that first of all it's unrealistic. You can't do it. How are you going to pay for it? The money's there, and there have been a number of proposals put forward to cut the money. And then secondly, the second point I'd make is that it's our property. The Libertarian Party voted in 2016 to say that income tax is theft. The Republicans aren't saying that. The Democrats certainly won't say that. We're the only party that believes that the money we earn is our money. I know it's a crazy idea, but it's us. It belongs to us. We work for it. Why is the government grabbing it and going? Well, because in 1913, they passed the 16th Amendment that said they could do that. Mm-hmm. I think it's time to repeal that amendment and go back to the way things were in America for the first, 100-plus years without a personal income tax. It can be done. It was done for a long time. It can be done again. So it's money that belongs to us. So first of all, it's the principle. It's the principle. It's my money. It does not belong to Washington, number one. Number two, certainly I would be open to other tax schemes, but all those tax schemes, with the exception of the fair tax, involves keeping the Internal Revenue Service in business. That is the last thing I want to do. The Internal Revenue Service has no business being in business. They've been politically weaponized by both left and right, and they need to be put out of business. And I don't think there's any reform of taxes. I think you need to shut the building, and throw a blanket over it and fumigate the building. That's the best that can be done for the IRS.
Matt Waters is on with us, running for the U.S. Senate from Virginia, Libertarian Party nominee. One of our founding members and board members once presented an idea to me, great property rights attorney, suggested that at some point or another we're going to get to a place where we're finally able to bring into court the idea that your income is your property and that any sort of taxation would be like a takings, and the government doesn't have the standing to the way the government would to say, there's a road that we need to do here, and that to really treat this like a property rights issue and force the government to go through the hard work of proving that they need that property. And I don't think they can do that, Matt. It's an interesting stand that you take on that, bringing the troops home as well. I think a lot of families would be happy. Once the troops are home, what is your view of how we have managed our veterans? I don't think we've done a great job. We have done a better job than we treated the vets after World War II, and certainly after Vietnam. But what about getting the folks home, getting the troops home once they're home, and helping them get past some of the things that they've had to see and experience in theater?
Yeah, no, those are really good questions, and there's multiple answers I could give. But first, let me say this: as a libertarian, and I have family, two uncles currently in the United States Army. Both have served as lieutenant colonel. One's a major. I've got people in the force. My son is joining ROTC right now to go into college. So I have a hats off to the military men and women, what the service they do. And I would say, too, this, bringing them back like we did after World War II, and what happened after the soldiers came back, there was an initial dip in the economy, but it led to the greatest boom in the economy. We have a jobs crisis in this country, people looking for jobs crisis in this country. We need more people in the workforce looking for jobs, and I think that's one place we have trained people coming back in from Iceland and Diego Garcia and Niger and the Syrian conflict, the civil war, where we have troops right now. Bring them home and redeploy them into the private economy. On how we take care of our veterans, look, the VA hospital is an absolute disaster. It's, just the front page the last week in the Washington Times. You see more confessions, more admissions. And they're never good confessions or good admissions. There are people who are waiting 100 days to see doctors and get medicine. Look, we know that a privatization of that hospital, it could work. We know that if you turn it loose to the private sector and get it out of the hands of government, it will work. And it just drives me nuts that we don't get this idea that when the government touches it, as Reagan said, it dies, right?
Yeah.
So we got to think differently about these things. But look, our vets, I don't think there's anyone out there who doesn't think that a private hospital, privatization of the VA would not do our veterans a tremendous service, including them.
Amen. So, Matt, let me ask you this. It was several, and I don't want to run out of topics, and certainly before November, we may have to visit several more times. Matt Waters running for Senate, Libertarian. We've certainly seen through the last 2 or 3 years several instances where our internal surveillance system, our national security apparatus, whether you go to the most recent, the Steele dossier and the Russians and the FISA court, and then even earlier than that, it was still baffling to me how a judge sitting in a FISA court doesn't ask an FBI agent, "This is all you got, and that this is sufficient." Judges just rubber stamping one piece of paper and a couple of pictures and saying, "Okay, yeah, go ahead, have a FISA warrant, and you can go surveil citizens." Does it need to be reformed or just removed, scrapped completely? What would you do with those needs if their needs happen?
Yeah, no, I would, there was a bill in Congress that looked at reforming the FISA court, limiting the powers therein. I certainly would have supported that. It did not pass. The Fourth Amendment, we talk a lot about the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment. We certainly talk about the Second. I'm a conceal and carry guy, have been. My wife and I both conceal carry, so we appreciate that. But then there's the Fourth Amendment, right, which is what you're touching on, and the idea of surveillance here. And look, it's very problematic when you see the revelations from, the FBI has tips on this guy in Florida, and they don't act on them, and that's a case where surveillance, even with the information, they failed to act. Or in the case of the FBI memo, or the Democrats going to the FBI to get this surveillance on Steele there, a wrongful, we think, abusive power there. Ed Snowden's leak showed what the phone companies are doing, and the giant online companies, Google, Yahoo, AT&T, et cetera, are doing with our data. Look, I think Americans should be very, very alarmed, and the civil libertarians in this country are mostly silent. I mean, it used to be that even on the left, you'd have some Democrats stand up and say no, but not anymore.
What about other senators? Certainly Rand Paul has been, and his dad have been the most libertarian members of the elected community. Would you, if you were to win, and the first libertarian going into the Senate since probably Jefferson's day, what do you think would happen across the country to the libertarian movement? Do we find guys like Rand Paul saying, "You know what, I'm now able to," or would you at least be able to caucus with some folks like that and to get some stuff done?
Yeah, I mean, I think the neat thing about the libertarians is we're really not right or left, right? I mean, we're kind of, and I don't want to say above it because it sounds very kind of haughty and kind of snooty, but that's, I want to say we're outside of that left-right prism, and hopefully we see liberty as the leading light for everything that we do, and if that leads us down to, look, we live in a free society. And there's some things in a free society we just have to live with. Things that, a lot of us disagree with. Is it drugs or, other things, sexual mores, these kinds of things that we just have to live with, right? So I'm not going to try to, as a conservatives would, use government to be a virtue provider. That's not the role of government. That's the role of the church. That's the role of communities. That's the role of families. So there's some areas where I could certainly work with the left and say, yeah, no, they're right about this. I mean, there's inequalities in the justice system. There's inequalities in the war on drugs and how it plays out in the African-American and Latino communities. Militarization of the police. What effect does that have on, Anglos versus, urban areas? So, and those are very real problems that we're seeing manifest today in places like Charlottesville. So, we need to be very sober minded about these things, and not. And I think this what we're playing so much of is gotcha politics, with left, right, blue, red, let's just do the Thomas Paine thing and introduce an unusual concept here in Washington called common sense, and look at the policies. Let's let the economics. Let's let the people have a participatory voice in this whole thing. So I think we're really utterly unique in that way.
So give us a little bit of your background. We've got a few minutes left before we're finished. Matt Waters is on with us. Give the listeners a little bit of where you come from to this Libertarian nomination to run for Senate against Tim Kaine.
Yeah, so I'm a lifelong Virginian. My family actually dates back to 1607. Believe it or not, I could show you the graph. It's a very big graph, actually. So we came over in the boat. We started in this country a colony, an independent free colony that blossomed into a free republic just 170 years later with the surrender of the British at Yorktown, Virginia. So I feel and know Virginia well. My father grew up here. He taught him. My mother grew up here. She was a teacher. I'm a husband of 20 years. I have 5 children. We homeschool 5 children. So we kind of opted out of a government education. Not to knock, educators. I think they're doing a tremendous job as well as they can. I'd like to get the federal government out of it and let localities and parents and states dictate that. So I've been an activist professionally for 20 plus years, a political consultant here, working with right-of-center organizations. So that's kind of my heartbeat. And again, I love the country and I love our state. And I fly under the banner. I want to call Virginians out and remember who they are. That our banner here is "Thus always to tyrants." And that's the banner of which this campaign is going to fly, because the tyrant today is no king in England. It's no tax of tea, but the tyrant is an IRS, and it's a surveillance state, and it's a $21 trillion debt right now that the Joint Chiefs of Staff see as a bigger threat than ISIS. So these are the things that it ought to compel us to look at solutions that unfortunately the Democrats and Republicans aren't even discussing.
We've studied classical democracies the way Madison did as he was trying to come up with a rule book that was going to make this free republic last longer than the 50-odd years that most democracies do, or at least had up until 1789, Matt. And, one of the things that strikes me about what we're seeing now on the public streets and the ability of Russia through a few fake Facebook pages and some Twitter accounts is to pit us against one another under the idea that if my candidate doesn't win, my life is in danger or is been diminished, is really one of those flaws in pure democracy, that we can vote for our own self-interest, and that once we start doing that, we begin our decline. Is that where we're kind of seeing ourselves on a theological or theoretical economics level, that we're all voting our own self-interest, and if we don't get our way, we're going to protest, march in the streets, and we're going to throw invective at very least, if not physical items as well, and we'll go into deep depressions if our candidate doesn't win?
Well, that's a lot, Joe. I would say, first of all, look, on the Russian meddling, I have to laugh, because I think the Russians have been meddling in U.S. elections since, about 1919, when the Soviets came to power. And by the way, just so everybody knows, we're sort of meddling in their elections too. So don't kid yourself. I mean, we're doing the same thing. We're monitoring the Merkels and the Theresa Mays. Our allies are being monitored by our government.
True.
Again, Snowden should. So. Look, we both play this side, but as far as politics in America today, I think people there's been a divide and conquer on both sides. I mean, the Democrats play these special interests to the hilt. I mean, they talk to the environmentalists, they talk to the pro-abortionists, and they talk to the educrats and all this, and they have their special interest. And I think doing that, they have no real clear vision for what they want to do for America. They have these different special interest groups. Republicans have their own challenges, right? I mean, you got Donald Trump, who just ate the party, and a party that used to be for balanced budgets, used to be for free trade. It's not so much anymore. So, both of them are having a kind of a moment where they have to decide who they are. But in all that, I just my campaign is to try to bring people back to the center and say, and not center as a political center, but just the center that, hey, we have this unique thing here in America. It's called individual liberty. This country starts with the point, the true north is the individual, not the state. You go around the world, Italy, Europe, they start with the state. Mm-hmm. We start with the individual. Utterly unique. And, every country has a private sector and a public sector. We have something other very unique, which is a nonprofit sector. The reason philanthropy is one of the greatest things, the gifts that America is giving the world, is because we have that.
Matt?
And,
we have to wrap up here, but we will have you back for sure. It's mattwaters.com. His family survived Jamestown, probably was the ones who convinced them that the socialism was wrong. And bless you for our visit.
Thank you.
You can steal that line if you like to. And thanks for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Great, Joe. Thanks for having me.
And
Take care.
You, thank you, and so long, and thanks for all the fish.